If you are a person looking for a new way to embody your life and to find holistic practices that are accessible without having to be an athlete or a meditation junkie, then you have stumbled onto the right podcast. Today's guest is Marcia Bonato Warren, and she has written an excellent book called Movement and Identity that we will get into in just a moment. She is a trauma-informed body psychotherapist, and her book's subtitle is Multiculturalism, Somatic Awareness, and Embodied Code-Switching. She has over 30 years of cross-cultural and mental health experience, and she really has written this book in a way that maybe if you're a therapist or a doctor, you might want to bring this into your practice, but as a person who may be from any sort of walk of life, these are exercises and tools to be able to bring into your life to improve your overall well-being. The word embodied has become a much more popular and common term in mainstream media, and most likely means different things to different peoples. For Marcia, she comes to the concept of embodiment through her lived experience in different cultures and professional training as a body psychotherapist. Marcia's work focuses on practical, accessible techniques that help people reconnect with their bodies, process emotions, and reduce stress. And I can tell you that I have been reading the book, and it is phenomenal, and I really do believe you're going to enjoy this interview. All right, let's get to it. All right, welcoming to the podcast, Marcia Bonato Warren. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. And I have just read your bio for everyone to hear, so we'll probably just move right into talking about your book and why you wrote it. Awesome. The book is called Movement and Identity, Multiculturalism, Somatic Awareness, and Embodied Code-Switching. Yeah. And it's out on Singing Dragon Press right now. Yes, welcome. Thanks for writing this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know that title is a mouthful, so I'm really happy to dive into it and let folks know what the book is all about and hopefully the experience they'll have when they read it.
Oh, it's good that you say experience, because that's kind of how I've been reading it. I actually, when I was looking at it, I thought it was a textbook just based on the title, but it's actually quite a user-friendly guide to a lot of somatic practices and self-reflection and understanding your culture, and then of course code switching, which we'll get into what some of these things are. And obviously you have a background to writing about this, so I think just as for the listeners out there, I think we should start with the basics, which would be maybe starting with the somatic awareness and then how that ties into multiculturalism. So,
sure.
I mean, I've read it, a good deal of it, but what is like a somatic thing for somebody who's never heard about that?
So somatic, and I kind of smile at this because when I was going through the somatic counseling program at Naropa University as a student, which was, I think 2012 to 2015, that was kind of part of what our elevator speech, quote unquote, would be, so like let people know what our professional identities were. And somatic was still something that folks were not quite familiar with. So oftentimes I would say the word and folks would think I said semantic, which is not the same. But somatic really is body-based, right? So soma, the Greek word for body. So somatic has to do with what we experience in our bodies, through our bodies, with our bodies, right? And somatic counseling is going to be, a focus and an integration of the body in the therapeutic process. Somatic awareness is something all of us have, right? Because we are physically in our bodies. That's how we experience this world. So if you think about it, if you feel into it, and your listeners can do this with me right now, we are in bodies at this very moment, right? It's always receiving information from our environments through these bodies. So, we can talk about the physical environment, like what do you notice right now as far as the space that you're in, the temperature of the air, The feeling of, sitting in a chair, if you're sitting in a chair. Those are some of those things. The other part of it is, what are we feeling within ourselves somatically? Like, and how does that tie to emotion and thoughts? So as I'm sitting here right now speaking to you, I'm noticing my breath in my body. I'm noticing my, muscle tension and relaxation. And how does that relate to being on a podcast right now with you and speaking to you? And I feel fairly relaxed and happy to be here. So I'm breathing well and I feel pretty relaxed. And, that's sort of my internal state, right? And then if you kind of bump that out another level in terms of somatic awareness, our cultures and our identities inform what we feel and what we notice in our contexts and in our relationships. And that's really what this book is about, is like turning on that little piece of awareness to include that in our experience.
Excellent. That's a very good introduction. And I want to get into how this relates to you and why you wrote the book, but I'm sort of meandering away from that for a minute.
Yeah.
To talk about the fact that this could be a book for clinicians. However, I would also say that this is very much a book for the average reader who is interested in learning about their own cultural expression, self-reflection expression, and also how to embody and feel like they're living in their body. Yeah. An interesting part about mental health in the last 10 years or so, we've been kind of talking, or 15, maybe mind body. We've been talking about the mind body connection, because a lot of counseling and psychotherapy was focused on what we were thinking,
right,
for so long. And we sort of learned that while you can really learn a lot of tricks to kind of talk to yourself and cognitive behavioral therapy your way out of certain traps, why were the thoughts coming up to begin with? And a lot of the thoughts are coming in from, like what you said, your perception of the environment, but also how your body feels, right? So oftentimes there's a joke, like when men get a cold, they think they're dying, right? Because they, a lot of times as a male in the society of the United States, growing up here, we are taught to sort of ignore pain and sort of, what's most important is your schedule and getting things done and doing things, and ignoring the body as a male stereotype. And this is what I think is what I've seen not every male, but a lot of males in my life, and men who are growing up as cisgendered men feel that way. Right. And then when we got a cold, all of a sudden we're having to face our flu or our illness. And all of a sudden these body feelings come up and it's like overwhelming. And I was kind of guilty of that as well, because I didn't even go to a yoga class till I was 18 years old. And when I went to the yoga class, I did the yoga class and I was like, what in the heck? I haven't felt this relaxed I felt it in my entire life. The only time I could remember is when I fell asleep on a beach. It was like the only equivalent. And I literally, at the end, we did a exercise where you relax after doing all the stretches, and you lay down and you, for 10 minutes, you meditate. And the teacher was this kind of Buddhist guy, and I fell asleep, and so did several other class members. And he had to go, hey, everybody, wake up, And so that was kind of my introduction to the somatic experience. But I think a lot of our current society encourages us to ignore that. And now we're trying to bring that into mental health in a holistic, full-bodied way. And in this book, it's not just about the body. It's about how the body reacts to not only the environment, but from our cultural background, from what the environment we're living in now, how both internal, external forces can change how our body reacts, thus going back to the mental health. It's a two-way street. So if our body is experiencing things, it's going to go to the mind. So I wanted to just say that this is a very accessible book for your average consumer to read. I was actually doing some of the practices myself in the beginning. I was doing, which I would love to get into, but I want to know kind of why. I want to bring in the personal story, but the mind emotion body scan. I've done the body scan before, but I'd never done all three. Right. Which I was like, how am I a therapist? I've never done all three. And I guess I had, but never intentionally. And then oscillation.
Love oscillation. That's one of the foundational skills of our program.
I
It's mind
love that
blowing.
one. I want to go over that one for sure.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
so there's these skills that can, and it sounds weird to the listener, but
Hmm.
these very simple skills, what I would say could help you, and you can tell me what you think they could do,
Hmm.
but I think
Yeah.
they could help you feel more aligned and more centered and to be able to understand yourself better. What are your some of the ways you use them?
Yeah. There's so much of what you just said, and I really appreciate, excuse me, I really appreciate you like reflecting on that because you just really embodied in this moment the work of this book. And so it makes me really happy to hear you kind of go through the process of your own experience with what it means to be in your body. And, the thing is, for every culture, there is a particular relationship that we have with our bodies that are informed not just by present moment, but by, our lineages, by, our expectations and it's very complex. So I'm sure folks at this point are like, I don't even know where to begin with all this, because if all that's at play, then what am I supposed to do with this, right? So I think my first invitation is like, at least in the United States, there's such a predominant focus on doing, right? Like I must do something. Self-care is doing something, right? Mental health is doing something. Like even yoga is doing something. So instead of doing, let's invite a being with, right? So who you are, your body in this moment is exactly what it needs to be, right? It is so many things are happening within your body just physiologically to keep you alive and stable at this moment that you have no awareness of and yet you trust, right? That's amazing. Think about that for just a moment. Like we don't have to ask our hearts to beat, our lungs to expand with air, none of that. Like that is happening already in and of itself. Much the same way, like the culture and identity pieces are running through us at every moment. So it's not just about the challenges of those pieces, but also about the resilience. And I talk about this in the book because we do all carry trauma. A lot of research is talking about how we pass down trauma and how that lives in us. But what's also passed down is resilience. So, particularly in this moment in time, when we talk about culture and identity, um, all of us are experiencing levels of trauma in a way that perhaps we haven't as a collective before. I can't imagine really a time, not in my lifetime, where there's been a shared experience quite like COVID was for people on this planet, right? Before that moment in time as a therapist, I had to explain what trauma meant to my clients, kind of do a psychoeducational piece. After that moment, I have not had to do that. People know what it feels like to have fight or flight moving through their system or have dissociation moving through their system, right? So we're already kind of in the soup of it all right now. So the tools for me, kind of coming back around to that, we have to begin somewhere, right? And if we are not familiar or in relationship with our bodies, and there's no shame or blame in that. I think in a lot of ways it's necessary, especially for folks that are from marginalized communities, particular identities, where it's not safe to be in the body. Those who have experienced trauma as well. There's a level of unsafety in the body. These are gentle ways to begin maybe exploring the edges of what it feels like to be in your body. And for those that have been working with their bodies in a particular way, it's an invitation to kind of approach it a different way. Athletes, even though they're fully in their bodies, have a different relationship, So there's a lot of overriding at times with sensation with athletes or with dancers or others that like are really creating something with their bodies, but maybe bypassing some of the signals that could be offered, right? So the tools are meant to be gentle, absolutely gentle. And really, the invitation throughout the book, I have like these little thought bubbles that come along as sort of my voice to encourage folks to just take a moment. Is that you really listen to what resonates with you, right? And don't push yourself. So, one of the first skill or tool in the toolbox, as I put it, is cultivating the pause, And basically, that's what it is. It's like, how often do you find yourself just going, 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 right? A thought comes up and you just keep cycling in the thought, right? The shoulds that happen in our lives, right? What if for a moment we just stopped, right? To say, okay, I'm just going to pause for just a second with this. Just take a second. right? Just pause with the thoughts or pause with the feeling, pause with the push or the pull, whatever that is, and just kind of provide some space, right? That can be a huge skill in terms of, think about, relationally. If you're in the same conversation over and over again with your partner and it's going nowhere, right? And folks have had that experience. What if you both took a pause, you know? And then the next skill along that is breathing. Funny enough, breathing has so much to inform us with, right? Like, is my breath deep right now? Is it shallow right now? I can control my breathing. It's something that is automatic, but it's something I can also control. And it can also open up a different experience for me. Breathing can bring us from hyperventilation, which can feel like panic, right? To regulation, which can feel like calm. So that's within our realm of kind of interaction with our own body systems. Right. And then you mentioned the other ones, mind, body, mind, emotion, body, and then oscillation. And then one of my tools, which is the sensation, interpretation, action loop. So we can
Oh,
talk
the
about that.
SAA. And we'll get
Mm-hmm.
into that one too. As
Yeah.
some examples. I was thinking about, for the listeners who don't know what we're talking about when we say don't live in the body.
Mm.
I think that the hard part is if you haven't done some of these exercises in your life, you can do them pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a moment I think a lot of us have had where we realized we were living in some sort of fear-based or stress-based or identity-based mind bubble, I would call it,
Yeah.
where we sort of ignore what's happening to our body for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have our reasons and maybe traumas that have occurred.
Yeah.
And we sort of escape into our mind. And that's not just a fantasy, it's a state of being where we ignore.
Yeah.
And in the US, the predominant Western medicine and only is starting to change a little bit, but only most of the time is what is involved in what's called symptom management,
Right.
which is essentially is that you have a symptom in the body or the mind, and the medicine is not to fix you or why the symptom is caused. It is there to dampen the experience of the symptom so you can function and produce capital.
Yeah.
So whereas Eastern medicine and more natural, holistic, traditional medicines from many different cultures involve going for what is called the root cause. Why is the symptom occurring? What for what reason? And instead of that symptom being a bad thing that we need to go to the drugstore and quick take something to get it to go away,
right?
It may actually be a messenger. Yeah. Right? Both mental and physical messenger. And so when you pause, I think for some people to get out of the brain where we hide in our brains and our egos, it can be scary for people because then they go, oh, wait a minute. I'm breathing now. I'm doing what Marcia said to do. And now I'm scared because I'm a human and like I have a fallible, I have a heart that's beating. And if my heart doesn't beat, then I could die. Or if my blood doesn't circulate, or I never knew I had a pain in my back. And what's up with my weird nail on my foot? And we start experiencing things. And I think for a lot of people, if they haven't been taught this, it's a very scary experience. However, I think in the book, you kind of go through how to calm yourself and learn to use the body experience. But I think the first time it happens, it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
And how many of us have experienced it, but then we forget and we go, I got to do this. I got to go here. I got to order this thing. I got to, work my job, and so it encourages us not to listen. And so we would prefer symptom management to true healing because there's no time to heal. That's kind of a cultural piece that we're hearing is the theft of time.
Yes.
And the theft of time is the theft of your life. So I think that's a difficult piece. I don't want to go too far into because I want to stick with your book. But that being said,
let me offer something to that because as therapists and particularly as somatic therapists, the temptation, of course, is like, let's go into the body. Let's, and I think what you name is so important because look, our minds are incredibly developed, right? I mean, that's what humans got to do. So we have a really, for not everybody, but most people in the world can lean on their minds and their brains to help them go through life. And in fact, there's a lot that happens in the brain that is absolutely perfect for ensuring our safety, right? However, especially when we talk about trauma, there are particular things that happen that keep us stuck in the loop of preparation, right? So, and what I mean by that is like, if we've had a trauma or had an event that has a particular, charge to it, right? And the body and the brain are very geared towards keeping us safe for the rest of our lives. Thank you very much, right? The way memory works, and I won't get too deep into this because that's like a whole nother podcast for folks, and there's plenty out there in terms of trauma modalities. But something important to remember is that the memory will be categorized in your brain in very particular ways and not in full context. So here's an example that I was given, and that I've experienced in some degree. Not me personally, as far as this example, but okay. So let's say that someone has been robbed, on the street in their life. And that in that moment, they really didn't see the person's face, but the person had a red sweater on and was of a particular height and build and particular gender, right? It happened really quick. It was a trauma moment. Okay. And it passed, and this person is living life. The brain categorizes particular things. And maybe for this person, it categorized red sweater, particular height, and particular gender, but that's about it, right? And it's not going to do the whole thing. It won't remember the whole memory and the details of all that, right? But it's going to remember salient things. Now, that's where we talk about triggers, right? So later on in someone's life, if there's a person with a red sweater with that build that's coming towards them at a particular speed, it could trigger that trauma response, right? So why I'm saying that is like there are things kind of embedded in our bodies that are meant to keep us safe, but also that we need to revisit with a pause and a curiosity to check in with more information, right? So like in that moment, and this is depending on how the person's worked with the trauma, if they get triggered, bringing a pause to that, being like, okay, what's happening right now? What else is happening in my environment? Is this another robbery? Yes, no. If it's a no, how do I come back into my body, help myself breathe, and come back into this present moment and know that I'm safe? That's really what this work is about, right? Mm-hmm. It gives us more choice in response to our environments. It gives us more information that we can feed back into our systems. It helps us have a fuller life in that way. Otherwise, we're in a response mode, in response mode to events that have happened to us in our lifetimes. And I would say even intergenerationally, because I know that gets passed down too. So
yeah, and the response mode is usually what you're talking about is when we're not really feeling in control. We're feeling in fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
And there's the new ones, fawn.
Right.
And then
which I'm so appreciative that's there, because that is so valued for particular identities in this culture that I want folks to know that, if that is a long-term trauma response that they've been in, that it makes sense that it's validated.
Oh, yeah. It's
people pleasing is a complete validation of a technique, and
Absolutely.
It's very hard to get out of that. Yeah.
It's a very difficult trap. And then we have also flop, where I think people give up.
Yeah.
And then my other new favorite is fracture, where we completely dissociate and sort of, can happen a lot. There's so much to say there, but fracture is when you feel like your identity and your mental state are fractured, and that can be many different symptoms with that as well. So and trying to live a life in our body in a calmer way can lead to better health outcomes, better choices in terms of decision making, relationship decision making, food choices. It can affect every single part of your life because the stress, when you have a stressful event or a trigger from trauma, which initiates more stress,
right,
it narrows your creativity and your ability to live. And I think
Absolutely.
we people are stuck in many different levels of stress and trauma without even knowing it, and sort of
Hmm.
coping in a
Yeah.
way, whether or not they know they're coping. So that being said, this does get
Mhm.
into, so we're talking about the body, we're talking about all these
Yeah.
things, but this is sort of like a this is sort of like a sampler, right? We're not reading the whole book to you. So um we were kind of dealing with the somatic awareness part. So I kind of want to talk about the multiculturalism of movement
Mhm.
identity,
Yeah.
because that has to do with you and why you wrote the book. And
Yeah.
then maybe later we'll go into well, not maybe, but later we'll go into the embodied code switching piece.
Yeah.
And I want to hit oscillation and sensation, interpretation, action. But let's
Yeah.
go into you. Let's talk
Okay.
about you. And why you wrote, your a little bit of your story, however much you want to tell, and
Sure.
kind of how this intersects, the somatic piece
Yeah.
intersects with multiculturalism.
Well, I think as therapists and writers and I don't know, I think maybe every profession, hopefully new ideas get sparked by a question that we hold for ourselves, right? I think about wounded healer as like, one of the things we talk about is as therapists and I teach now and I do supervision. So like I really encourage my students and my supervisees to hold that gently within themselves that, what they've experienced in their lives, as painful as that could be, is also a doorway to insight for themselves and also a way to build empathy and true understanding with the folks that they work with because we all suffer. We all have a place where something didn't make sense to us, and then we try to figure that out along the way. And I say that because, my work came out of a fundamental experience I had growing up where I did not know a lot. And I'll put
Mhm.
it this way. So my father is Native American. And actually, that's interesting. I said is. My father just passed away in August, so
Oh,
he's still with
yeah.
me. But yeah. So he's from Santa Clara Pueblo. I'm an enrolled member of Santa Clara Pueblo, which is in New Mexico. So I'm indigenous. My mother immigrated to the United States from Brazil. I call her an accidental immigrant because she didn't intend to stay. She was going to stay for a couple years and teach Portuguese and Spanish, and then go back to Brazil. And then she met my dad, and there you go. And so they got married, they stayed, they had me, they had my brother. And a big part of what happened is that I think because my mom, even though she knew English, but she was really learning it like fluently during the time that she was in the States and then raising us, she didn't speak to my brother and I in Portuguese. And of course, my father didn't speak Portuguese. He spoke Spanish, ironically. And so she didn't, so I didn't have her language in my growing up. But what she did do is that she would take my brother and I back to Brazil every 2 or 3 years for a few months at a time. And so we'd get immersed every time, right? And she would switch to speaking Portuguese to us during that time. So like, so culture shock over and over and over again. And there was a point in time that I do know that I was fluent, and she's told me that, and, I dream in Portuguese. So, and I speak it fairly well now if I have a few weeks under my belt of being immersed in it. So that was one piece of the experience of this immersion into a Brazilian, family and culture from a young age up. And then on my dad's side, we would be immersed in Pueblo culture for family gatherings and traditional events where I did hear Tewa being spoken. That's our language, but we weren't taught Tewa because my dad didn't learn it. And that's because of federal Indian policy that basically beat it out of indigenous children in boarding schools and other environments to not speak the language, even though my grandmother spoke it. So she didn't teach it to my dad. My brother, however, is fluent in it. So he lives in Santa Clara, has worked in Indian affairs and for a very long time. So I'm very happy that we have reclaimed that. But as a child growing up in these environments, I was immersed in both of these cultural environments without a spoken language to contextualize it. So I got very good at reading the nonverbal communication that was going on, very attuned to my environment, and probably more so than I even realized at the time. I was very outwardly focused and really tracking people in order to figure out how to be in relationship with folks, and how to not do anything wrong. And so much of culture is unspoken rules. And so invariably, I was going to be doing something wrong, and I think because of that experience, I got very sensitive to kind of the micro movements and micro expressions from folks, the cadence of how people spoke, how loud or how soft, how close people got to me, all those things. And for me, that's the beauty of what I was given in my lifetime, is that awareness. Even though it came from sort of a difficult situation of going into these places and spaces with people that I loved, but I couldn't quite connect with fully because I didn't really know, it did give me a deep awareness and a deep appreciation for how people relate to each other through their cultures in a way that's not just about the words that are spoken, right? So I think I sort of pursued that throughout my life in school in different ways. I studied international relations, intercultural communications later on. My first career was in Native American policy and advocacy. So I kind of immersed myself in those experiences I think, to really deepen my sense of my own identity and culture, but also just in general, culture and identity and how they relate to each other. That was always my desire, is like, how do people actually connect across difference, right? Before we had kind of those words that we have in the culture now, like, bridging divides and all that. That was sort of what I was doing. But I think it didn't really come home until I decided to go back to school. My kids were little, I think they were in grade school, and I decided to become a counselor. And so Naropa University here has a somatic counseling program. It's a contemplative education. I wanted to continue, being of service. That feels like it's part of my life and how I engage with the world. And there was a class that we took where we were asked to embody our different movement patterns, called movement signatures, right? And in that moment, I realized I didn't have just one. I had three. I had one that would show up in terms of gestures and postures and things when I thought about myself in Brazil. I had one that, in terms of kind of a way that I was moving through the world, that came up when I thought about being in Santa Clara, the Pueblo. And then one that was sort of an in-between identity that just like a mix of things and nothing at all, and felt very lost and didn't really know how to adjust and how to express and what to do. And that's where I was like, oh, okay. There are different ways of how I move and how I express myself in my body and through my body, depending on the culture that I'm in. And then during that time, I heard the term code switching for the first time. And I was like, oh, okay, which was this movement between identities in a way that I really wasn't aware of. And so part of, what we do in that program is master's papers. So, research. And I thought, okay, for sure, someone's talked about how the body code switches. And at that time, this was 2015, there was nothing about that out there. It's linguistics had it, yes, for sure. Biracial, multiracial psychology talked about code switching for sure. But like somatically, there wasn't really an exploration of that. So that's what I started to do. And I just love it. The topics of how we embody our culture, how our identities are formed, how we have choice around that. That's really what I think grew into what the book is today, is, how do we do that deep dive into who we are? And it can often be painful and difficult because there's, parts about our identities that if you're multicultural, you're never feeling fully a part of the cultures that you embody. There's a sense of, longing that I have around that. But there's also this beauty of being able to be in between those cultures and, in a sense, able to connect to many different types of people in many different types of cultural contexts. I believe it's a superpower, and I think it's something that we all need now in our world. The ability to really be with ourselves, understand ourselves, and also understand and be in contact and relationship with others that are not like us.
Yeah, I would say that is very well needed, so we can all get along. We only have one planet that is livable. So
yeah.
you say that. Thank you for that. That connecting yourself to the work that you're doing now with the book, and in the book, you're teaching others how to do the work as much as they want to do it.
Hmm.
if it seems like it's got like the basics all the way to advanced. You
Yeah.
said in the book, embodiment is not a static state, nor necessarily an endpoint to finally be reached. It is an
Hmm.
ongoing invitation that asks us to break down the borders between the mind, emotions, and body, and let a dialogue develop that we can that can inform each of these internal states as partners. Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a therapist, so I love internal family systems and ego state therapy and
Hmm.
the idea of having a dialogue with oneself.
Yeah.
Because I find that we all have ambivalence about
Hmm.
a number of topics, and we have different ways of feeling, and again, culturally dependent, who are around,
Yeah.
what's happening in us. But in your embodiment here, we're going not just in our minds and emotions, but we're bringing the body into it.
Oh, yeah.
And so that I think is difficult because
Hmm.
as therapists, we sit in a chair,
Yeah.
which, they say sitting is the new smoking, right?
Yeah.
So, and we have been advised by insurance companies to
Yeah.
stay in the room and
Yeah.
to not do anything that would be out of scope,
Yeah.
which means we can talk and we can sit and we can sit on the floor and we
Hmm.
can stand
Yeah.
and maybe stretch a little bit with
Yeah.
doctor's permission, but
Yeah.
we shouldn't be walking around with our clients. We should
Mm.
not be doing stretching exercises or anything else. And if we
Right.
do if we do body movement, it's eye
Yeah.
movement or tapping, which is
Yeah.
now accepted thanks to
Right.
EMDR and other
Right. Hmm.
types of therapies. But in a strange sense, therapy is almost being held back due to
Hmm.
training and scope from really getting into the body,
Yeah.
like a physical therapist might, right?
Right.
So we don't want to go that far, but we'll stay in our lane. But
Well,
helping
let
the
me,
person learn. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let me offer something because I think and this is a really great point, when folks think about going in the body, what might come up first is movement, right? I have to move and I have to do big movements and and that's not necessarily how a session shows up,
Mm,
so maybe I can give sort of a behind the
yeah,
curtains,
let's go with that.
peek at that. So, in the context that you're talking about, yeah, I mean, we're in an office, and, when I was in private practice, right now I'm teaching, so I'm not seeing private clients, but this is how I envisioned and how I worked with clients. My office space, the space itself was part of the therapeutic process. Okay.
Mm,
So when I speak about body, it's not just body internal, it's body in relationship to space and people. Like the body is connected to everything, right? So when clients would come in, we would use the space almost immediately. I'm like, where would you like to sit? Do you feel like sitting? Do you feel like standing? Do you want to be on this couch? Let your body lead you to where it feels like it wants to be today in relationship to me, right? And to the space. Okay, so they would choose a place. And then we talk about, how does it feel? Where do you want me to be? Do we want to be angled? Do we want to be facing each other? Like facing, pacing, and spacing is another one of the skills that I didn't get a chance to put in the book because only so much I could put in the book. But, how we face each other for face to face can feel very confrontational. If you're angled, it could feel more relational. So all these things, start playing with that as clinicians. Think about your space. How's the lighting? How's the sound? What are the colors like? Are there objects in the space that you want to use and transform in the process? Like, I would do this all the time. Like if someone wanted to be talking, like empty chair, we call empty chair, right?
mm,
So talking to somebody that's not actually there, like, does the chair begin to embody something? How do we do that purposefully, right? I'm starting to get kind of esoteric here, but like that's part of it. So then once that's set up, right, then really bringing the body into the therapeutic process is asking it to participate. So this is why it's important, the mind, emotion, body movement, right? Because our minds are going to want to really run the show. Like, I think this, and these are my thoughts, and this is my memory, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. So holding that, then what are the emotions coming up? All right, if there are emotions coming up, let's touch into that. Not negating any part of what the mind has said, but I want to give it more information. So, all right, I'm feeling sadness, blah, blah, blah. And then like the tried and true question, how do you feel that in your body? Where do you feel that in your body? Now this is where it gets to be really I think, the most creative and the most spiritual part of the work is that when we invite the body in to participate, it becomes very meditative in some ways. And I mean that in terms of like coming into a contemplative energy around it. Like everything slows down. It can become very symbolic. So if now, let's say I have an emotion tied to a memory, and I'm asking my body about that, like my body may offer a very small movement around that. My breath might catch, right? I could feel a pit in my stomach. It's starting to give me information about what that experience is. And it also gives me ways of how to process it, right? So now we get to have all three of the voices of our experience present. We've got what the mind offered, which is information. We've got emotion and the feelings associated with that. And by the way, the absence of emotion is still emotion. So that's still a valid place to go, right? And then we've got what the body wants us to know and to feel in that moment. And then we get to ask the body, what needs to happen next? And that's where I've seen things like, a movement like a hand coming up, right, can turn into a palm facing outward and a push wanting to happen. And how do we hang out with that movement all the way through slowly? And what do you feel as you come up with that movement? Tears can come up, words can come up, things like no can come up. We let the body lead us and we get into this landscape of experience that as a therapist could feel scary because you're like, I don't know where we're going next, right? And for the client could feel a little overwhelming because they don't know either. But there's a trusting in that I've seen come through that I would not have been able to guide someone to even if I had wanted to. It's not my place to do that either, Like I trust their body, I trust the process, I trust the symbols and the metaphors that come up that will lead us to whatever the body needed to do in that past moment that it couldn't do. And now we get to do.
So by processing this, just for the people that aren't therapists, when you're saying what happened in that moment, you're bringing it up, you're having the body, the emotional information or the emotional feelings, the body's movement. Mm-hmm. In a way, we're revisiting something maybe that wasn't good that happened that we can't stop thinking about or feeling weird about or sad about. And we're now kind of letting the body reprocess this and the mind and the emotions in a safe place so that by processing that, and we can use EMDR, we could use IFS, we can use what you're talking about in your book, embodiment, just so people understand the reference point, that the body can get back in alignment with itself. Yeah. And the mind can be in alignment with time. And the emotions can be free to express. And thus, the state you become in is more present, which means for a parent, more ability to really see your kids and be there. Yeah. For somebody who maybe is a single person without kids, like a way to really understand and reflect as to who you are and what you want to do. Yeah. It's the healing isn't, like you said, a destination. It's more of a coming back to, but with power now. Yes. You gain back your agency, your autonomy. For an easy example is domestic violence. When somebody's in a domestic violence cycle, for especially a while, more than a few weeks, well, even a week would probably do it. But the more time it's in the cycle, there's these remembered body stances, remembered behaviors, and it gets worse and worse and worse. It's like a storm that keeps coming. Right. And so then if they finally exit that situation, which is very difficult to do for a lot of people because they don't know what they would do without the relationship, then they might still be having a storm while they're hanging out with their friends or family or their workplace. Yes. And they're all like, what's going on with you? Why are you acting so strangely? Why are you so, why are you indulging in all these strange coping behaviors, going to the casino, eating all these donuts, smoking all these cigarettes? What's wrong with you? Are you crazy? Right. When in fact, they're trying to cope with the storm that's ongoing in their mind and body post domestic violence. Right. But the domestic violence is still happening. It's just happening inside of them. Yes. And so thus, this is where we get into your tools. Yes. just the basic tools to me were impactful.
Mm.
The way you talk about the breathing body,
Mm.
I felt your description of this, which some people would just call breathing mindfulness, was
Mm-hmm.
so accessible, because sometimes when I read mindfulness books, it feels so sort of self-important.
Yeah.
And I won't name names of who wrote those ones, but
I think I would probably know what you mean, but
there's a
yeah,
few
yeah.
different academics who've written some mindfulness books.
Hmm.
Whereas I do love the mindfulness-based stress reduction workbook. I think that's the most clean of them.
Yeah.
But there's some self-importance in some of this stuff, and I don't know what that's about. But yours is
Yeah.
very accessible, and I feel like if you had an ego, it's gone from
Oh,
these pages. So
thank you.
good job. Yeah. So just, it's very simple about how to breathe, and you describe the different parts of the body where you might feel it, and what to happen, what could happen in a very holistic way, and
Hmm.
the out breath and the in breath, and how to experience that, and what some of the pitfalls could be, and how you can use the tool.
Yeah.
And then after that, once you kind of learn to go into the breath, you talk about a version of this you took from the Sensory Psychotherapy Institute.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
Sensory motor
Sensory
psychotherapy.
Motor
Yep.
Psychotherapy Institute,
Hmm. Yeah.
which is the mind emotion body scan,
Right.
which most of
That's
us
where
are.
the scan was inspired by my teacher and trainer, Kikuni Minton, who's the co-author of the book with Pat Ogden.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Kukuni Minton and Pat Ogden. Okay,
Yeah.
so I love this description. So you kind of start with the breath, and you kind of get people into it, and then
Mhm.
you go through all of these. It's interesting. I've never heard this before,
Mm.
because usually people say, what are you noticing? Noticing what your mind is saying. Just notice what your mind is saying, right? But
Yeah.
you're saying, stay with your mind. What do you notice? And you say, don't try to control it, allow whatever comes up to come up and all that stuff. But you say, what is the pace of your thoughts? I like that.
Yeah.
Fast or
Yeah.
slow, which is a measurement. Do
Hmm.
they come and go or swirl, which I'd not heard that before since a yoga class, really. How would you describe them if you could see them move?
Yeah.
What is the quality of your thoughts? Notice if they have a pattern or if they're more random. Do your thoughts reflect actions, beliefs, or musings? As best you can, stay curious to the content without judgment. Notice the pull to respond or resist. Does it feel comfortable or uncomfortable to be in this mind
Hmm.
state? Unfamiliar or familiar or comfortable?
Hmm.
And I read that out of order, but that's okay.
That's good.
If your mind were to give you a message, what would it say? I love that. That's
Yeah.
so, it's interesting. I'd gone to some hypnosis classes and some EMDR. So I've done some things like this, but I never had seen it like written out like this.
Yeah.
And then you get to emotions, and you kind of go through a whole thing about the
Hmm.
emotions. And then you go the whole thing through the body and your body awareness, quiet or loud, tense or relaxed, still or moving. How are you noticing these? Do you have some sensations that are stronger, quieter? And so what you're doing here without judgment is you're feeding us measuring tools, I
Hmm.
think, and ways to experience that. And then we go into the whole body. And I actually did this 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I don't feel I have ever gotten this deep in a scan before.
Oh, wow.
Because oftentimes I'm doing the body scan and I'm just like, where was the tension?
Right.
Okay. And then if we go to advanced kind of stuff, we go, okay, somatic, some of the stuff I've been taught. Okay, now go to the tension. Imagine what
Hmm.
it's saying to you.
Yeah.
Imagine a color, a picture, and all that. But
Right.
this was like so immersive that I didn't need to like do those kind of activities. It just sort of
Yeah.
like flowed, and I felt way more aware and relaxed, and also tense. I know there was some tension and other
Yeah.
things. I noticed how I was feeling, right? I felt
Yeah.
relaxed afterwards, but I also noticed,
Yeah.
why are you thinking about that? I thought,
Yeah.
what is that about? And so I kind of
Yeah.
explored something that was kind of what I would call ruminating, kind of
Yeah.
circling the drain, if you would.
Right.
And I
Right.
was kind of like, well, that's weird. What's that about? Right. And so then
Yeah.
it had me be curious. And it's
Hmm.
interesting that nobody teaches this in elementary school. I
You know,
really, one of
wouldn't
my
that be awesome?
one of my biggest pushes, if I ever get my way, if I had my druthers, would be to reform the education of the United States. Because I did have an education degree,
Hmm.
but it would be more or less just right now, because I don't think that would be too big of an undertaking. Just inserting emotional and relational awareness classes into each
Yeah.
grade.
Yeah.
age appropriate and
Yeah.
secular, to teach
Yeah.
us about our emotions, about our bodies, about
Yeah.
breathing, about basic
Yeah.
things that nobody teaches us,
Yeah.
and then how to then relate to parents and authority figures and friends in a way
Mm-hmm.
that is nonviolent.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's coming anytime soon.
Yeah.
Based on my current
Yeah.
temperature reading the culture, I don't
Yeah.
think so. So anyway,
Yeah.
thoughts about
Yeah.
the
Oh,
exercise?
well, yeah, I'm so glad you did it. That's so much fun to hear because, like, I teach it and I do it myself, and it's just kind of part of what I offer to folks in terms of an actual internal movement
Hmm.
of awareness, right? So, an oscillation is that too. So it's like think of it as how do we stretch out. And no one can see me right now, but I'm doing that myself with my hands. So how do we stretch out our own self-awareness?
Hmm.
And then how can that apply to what we notice in our environment? And that's really kind of at the basis of what embodied code switching is approaching, is like in each of our cultural identities, in some ways it can be very tight, right? Like we have
Hmm.
just a lot of things that are telling us who we should be, how we should move, how we should relate, what's safe, what's not safe, all the messaging, right? And then inside we are who we are, right? So like how do we discover that about ourselves? Well, if we're constantly responding to the external environment, kind of like what I was talking about in terms of my growing up experience, I don't think I ever considered going back inside myself to ask, what am I feeling right now? What do I want right now? Is that thought accurate for me or not right now? And
Hmm.
not in general, but like right now is a really important, distinction. Like, in this very moment, what's happening for me inside? And so, doing body scans just by themselves in the way that you described it, I think is awesome. I'm very happy to see that it's out there in the world. I think that's one way to definitely check in with yourself. What I was more interested in is how can I get all the voices in my system, not just my head chiming in, not just an overwhelming emotion, because a lot of times my emotions would come really fast and strong and I'd be like knocked over by them and I didn't know why. And then my body was just not participating. I'm like, how do I get all three in there?
Hmm.
Because then I don't feel so alone. Right. And then I can really get curious, like what you were saying. It's like, oh, that's interesting about that ruminating thought. Where'd that one come from? Right. And to me, then we start to understand our own signals. Right. We start to understand that we've got certain things that come online, like sensations or even emotions or thoughts, that if we notice them, then we have more choice around them. Right. So, like, if I'm holding my breath, I want to get curious about, oh, I'm holding my breath. What thought is coming up for me right now about that? And I'll give an example for that. Like for a while, and I still don't know why this came up. No, actually, I do know why, because it just popped in my head. So I would be in a store shopping and just looking at stuff, and I would realize I was holding my breath and feeling like really tense. Nothing else was happening other than just me looking through the clothes. And once that happened more than a few times, I paused, I took a pause. I got curious about it. I said, okay, I'm noticing I'm holding my breath. What emotion is coming up around here? And it was like it was a fear emotion. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And just kind of bounced between that. I'm like, okay, fear, holding my breath, and okay, what's the thought coming up? And the thought that came up, and this is where I just had to let it kind of, present itself, was don't spend money. You're spending too much, right? And I've been literally in the middle of the store kind of hearing this in my head. I'm like, whose voice is that? And then you start hearing whose voice is that, and there are a couple voices, and I won't name who those voices were. But then once I realized it's not my voice, it was another voice that I had heard repeatedly telling me that with a lot of shame and judgment. I'm like, no wonder I'm holding my breath and I'm tense when I'm looking at things that I might want to buy. So that's like a sliver of my life and not a really big charged one at all. But notice how this kind of mind, emotion, body scan can be so helpful with that. Because either if I hadn't done that, I would have overridden, you know, the holding breath. Um, I maybe would have stopped that behavior and not known why. gone into kind of the emotional piece of it, the shame piece of it, and been very confused around that, or maybe gotten angry as a response. I'm not sure, but it would have kept me stuck in an experience, right? So this is where I love the movement in between the three. That's the invitation, is like, yeah, we're going to have a lot of thoughts. That's going to be predominantly perhaps where people go first, or it could be an emotion that gets really strong first. Let's bring in the body and see what it has to offer, right? And then ask it next, what should I do? What do we want to do? We collectively, mind, emotion, body. What are we going to do together here? Right? And then just let those words come, let the messaging come. And, like oftentimes I would do this, and I still do it for fun. It's like, okay, body, what do you want to do today? It's like, let's go walking. Okay, great. Or even if I'm, at a store, it's like, what do you want to look at today? Okay, I just go follow whatever impulse that is. Like within reason, folks, like impulse control is good too. But, invite your body in, see what it wants to do.
I love that. Well, I love that you're, asking your body and your mind and being curious about, things to do. And I think oftentimes the body, because it's keeping us alive with, thousands of micro processes, mitochondria, cleaning our blood right now through our kidneys, oxygen, filtering things through the lungs. It's doing a great job. So it often has good advice. Like, you should take a walk. I think, humans, according to the American Heart Association and other places, are saying, 10,000 steps a day, right? Now we're knowing from mental health, the research shows that if you can exercise 30 minutes a day, your depression scores will go down. And that's just hard science right there, if you can do that. So, but my question is, so we're all, open, like, oh yeah, let's listen to our body and mind scan and all this and emotions. And I'm hearing that, and I'm thinking, what about people that are from a culture or have cultural messaging in their family where they're like, oh, don't explore the body. No, no, no. And be careful, what you think. Your thoughts can be, bad or like sinful, or say something about you, or guilt or shame. What are your thoughts about that culturally? Because now we're coming back into the multicultural kind of idea here.
Right. So, wow, where to even start with this? Because this is where the topic of embodiment, I want to push back on a bit, because it is that it turns into a value. And I think this is something that U.S. dominant culture does a lot with contemplative practices in general. I've seen it over the years with yoga. I've seen it with mindfulness/meditation, with all those things. There's something about this appropriation of those practices that then turns it into a should, right? And turns it into an expectation. And I think that there's a deep unfairness to that, because I'll just be blunt, the folks that are doing that are in particular bodies of color and privilege that where they can, right? So, if you have the ability to do those practices and make it part of the cultural norm, that negates, I think, the nuances of how it shows up for other folks in different bodies in different social locations. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it that general, because in this moment in time, we have certain ways that it's showing up. It's always going to be that way because we're humans on this planet. And that is something that, along the topic of suffering and, that's just seems to be part of our human condition. Power being a presence in our lives, right? And hierarchies and all those things. Okay, so that being said, in the book, I do this quite a bit. I bounce it back to the reader, to the person who's experiencing this. It's like, okay, this is all information that I'm bringing through. How does it land for you, right? I am not the expert on who you are. And you have your own culture and your own identity and your own lineages that have informed you, okay? So even the term embodiment or body, okay, is culturally bound. So how does that show up for you, or how is it not shown up for you? And can you be curious about how those experiences have shaped your own expectations and relationship with who you are in this body today, right? So, there's an example, like there's a really great article, actually it's a chapter in a book about, and I'm going to forget the exact title, but it's actually written by someone who's a translator, but she's talking about indigenous perspectives on the senses, okay? And that it's in many other cultures, there's more than five senses that are described. And in fact, there's either a combination of senses or a transcendence of those senses or a relationship of those senses to the environment that is a completely different experience than what we talk about in the US dominant culture through the English language about five senses. So let's sit with that for a moment, so there is no one way to categorize body or sensorial experience. Okay, so that's one. And then if you layer on safety, trauma lineage and history, what does it mean to be in a body in this moment in time, right? Again, there are going to be choices that cannot be made fully depending on the context, all right? In general, let's just say a police officer pulls you over and you are of a particular identity, right? Your movements are going to be very curtailed, right? And folks know, of the identities I'm speaking of, they know what I'm talking about right now. No quick movements, no eye contact, tone of voice shifts, all those things, right? Okay. The choice within that, though, and this is what I want to offer folks, the more you get to know what your body's responses are depending on the context, the more I hope folks realize that they're making a choice that empowers them, even if it's to adjust themselves so that they don't get hurt. Okay? If it's an automatic response every single time and you feel powerless in that, that's going to have a different impact on you and your health and your well-being and your psychological state, right? It shifts when you know it's coming, perhaps, right? I'll use the same example. You're like, okay, I'm being pulled over again. Great. All right. While the cop gets out of the car, I'm going to take a deep breath because that's probably going to serve me for a little bit. And I know what to do now. I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And I'm just going to convey that message of I'm not a threat. I'm not going to move quick. I'm not, just in your own internal dialogue about that. This is something I'm doing in order to stay safe. And when this is over and I'm safe, I'm going to, take another deep breath and, do the next thing in my life, get support around this or whatever, right? So there are many moments where we don't have choice, apparently, right? But we always have a internal choice of how we either consider what's coming up, how we prepare for what's coming up, or even after something happens, how we engage with that. And it doesn't, again, have to be big. In fact, I would say if folks have an expectation that they have to do an interpretive dance after something, it's not necessarily that. It can be as subtle as taking a deep breath later, or noticing the pit in your stomach and just touching it with your consciousness and being like, I'm here. I know, right? Like, if we can consider our bodies as partners in the experience, then we're not ever alone. Maybe that's what I'm trying to reach with this work, is that when you feel like you have no choice, check in with different parts of your system that can offer a choice, even as minute as that might be, right? You may not be able to run away, but you might be able to offer, a part of your body a sense that it's running away. Move your toes in your shoe, press down on the ground. I don't know. These are places you can go.
Right. And thank you for that. And I think that's hitting on some of the multicultural part of it. And I remember I read some of the chapter, Finding Culture in Our Bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this cultural iceberg, so I want to ask about that. But
Yeah.
to kind of preview that, there was an anthropologist, Thomas
Sordus. Yeah.
Sordus,
Yeah.
provides an insight to our previous question, which is both definitive and offers an open invitation to our discussion. To him, an individual's, quote, embodied experience is the starting point for analyzing human participation in a cultural world.
Yeah.
So, cultural embodiment as a means of gaining information about the world and the people within it through perception and attention facilitated by the body. He called this type of awareness somatic modes of attention, which he viewed as culturally elaborated ways of attending to and with one's body in surroundings that include the embodied presence of others, which I think you were sort of just describing. This, stereotypical, cop pulling you over. You don't know what you're going to get. So you're trying to survive.
Right.
And taking a pause in the breath, you've read and seen videos of how cops behave when they're yelled at or, you move quickly. They make very poor judgments. So I can't change their training. So how do I keep myself safe? And in a way, you're calling for not compliance, but like a larger sense of who you are, not just self-preservation, but a deeper self-preservation, because your life is more important than this cop stopping you. Right. Your presence and your embodiment is something that will live on and can live on. The hard part is if we get caught up in our automatic response, fight, flight, freeze, we might be in a pickle, right? Because of the authority structures and the power structures that we live in, that we can participate in working to change, but cannot just control with our ego or our desires.
Right.
And that's a reality of people that have lived in any sort of organized Western state, or Eastern state, or I guess organized as well. We're not really in a tribal format in the bigger part of the United States. We're living in like a system that has these sort of power and privilege baked into it. Right. And so that's the difficult part, is becoming a victim to that, or trying to live in a way that is not as victimized, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yeah, in some ways it's like, I want to acknowledge as well that, there's this piece around people's experiences, and I'll be more clear this way. Like, if you are an African American male in that car, right? The risks are much higher, the occurrence much higher. Like, there's a repeated ongoing trauma piece that happens over and over and over and over again, right? That's a different experience than me as a woman of color, of ambiguous ethnicity and race. Like, folks can't see me right now, but like the question I've gotten throughout my life is, what are you? Not even who are you, but what are you, right? Okay. So there's some, and I will name it, there's some privilege in that as well, because I don't get pegged necessarily. I get other assumptions placed on me, right? So those experiences are going to be different. It's going to be different than if you are a white male in that car, right? And for different reasons, that interaction is going to bring up different survival techniques, right? We cannot ignore those as being real in this country. Anywhere in the world, there's always going to be a power differential that's based on some, part of someone's identity, based on the perception of someone else, in that interaction. What I'm saying is that, how we can recognize that as much as possible, anticipate that as a reality and prepare ourselves for it, okay? That can live in the body. That is portable. We can do that with us, right? So it's not about, I'm not doing a spiritual bypassing thing here. And I don't love that in terms of sort of what can happen with mindfulness practices. It's like, if I just employ this and everything's going to be fine. No, I mean, like, in those moments, by the way, your body will go into a trauma response if that's what it's done. Okay, let's be gentle around that afterwards. Thank your body for keeping you safe. That's part of it. That's part of the process. And then how do you stay in relationship with your body around that event in order to be able to, you know, live your life, with more moments of safety than fear, if that's possible. Right. So I'm not trying to be, overly optimistic about this, but I am wanting to offer some sense of agency. And I think the other words that come up for me around this, because it is so tied to identity, especially for multiculturalism, there have been expectations in the past, and even today, where in order to be part of a society, you have to assimilate. And assimilation by nature is negation and fragmentation of parts of ourselves. That is not what I'm advocating here. I'm advocating adaptation in a way that you keep all your parts, you keep your identities, and you make choices around what parts of you show up and where and how. But you never ever like negate those parts of you. That I'm saying that for me, like that was my struggle, is like, how do I have all of me present, but really decide, what parts of myself show up and in what context for the service of myself as a whole.
And would you say that's sort of not that's not the definition, but that is code switching, because you're not abandoning your language and your personal identity to assimilate. You're adapting to what situation you're in. Because if you're in Brazil or the Pueblo or Albuquerque, those are three different contexts completely. And I think some people might unconsciously do that. And what you're trying to do is, by bringing this in, is consciously building that for yourself to adapt to the situation, circumstances you may find yourself in. I've met a lot of people from Mexico whose parents wouldn't speak Spanish to them, right? And they feel so screwed because they speak only English, but they look like they're from Mexico. And then they get, people grief from both sides, for that. And it's like, my grandfather's from Germany, and I remember we went to this German hall one time, and they were all speaking German, and he speaks German, but I didn't. He wasn't my dad; he was my grandfather. And this other German guy said, something. They don't speak the language. Oh, what a shame! In English to me, and I'm like, screw you, buddy. Like, I didn't grow up in Germany, but like, you know what I mean? Like, even there, I saw that and I was like, oh, should I feel bad about this? And I was like, wait a minute. No, I shouldn't feel bad about this. My dad chose to, not really teach me German, and that's okay. Right. That's not what, my grandfather kept it going, but my dad didn't find it useful to speak German because all of his relatives spoke German and English, and he spoke English. So it's just what he did. Right. But it's not so. Because of the monoculture of the United States, it wasn't such a problem for me because I'm growing up around white Europeans. This only came out around very German people, where that came out that I was German and I didn't speak the language. And that's a whole nother situation, because I represent my skin color is the dominant skin color, and thus I'm not really pegged for what, like you said, like projected upon. I'm projected upon, but other things. Usually things I don't identify with, but not bad things usually. So on page 112, and when I say bad is bad by that person's perception, the cultural iceberg, I know we've only got a couple minutes left here, but I've been enjoying this, but I think people should buy the book just for this graphic. And it's this cool iceberg, because we always know we've heard about like the mental health iceberg and like what's on the surface and our persona and what we kind of put out in the world and what's really going underneath the water. And what we know from iceberg research is that icebergs are larger beneath the water than they are above the water. So I won't read the whole thing, but you have the surface culture, a lot in there. The surface culture and kind of the explicit behavior. So like, if we go to like a cultural festival, it's like, oh, let's go to the Greek festival. It's the food, right? Let's go to the Latin American, cultural festival. It's the dancing and the food and the music and the, or whatever, it's the language, and we're having games and fashion and arts and literature. And we're having this like fun thing. Like, I love going to cultural festivals. You see all these like cool things, from different cultures kind of expressing themselves. Right. But then underneath all of that, I won't even, there's so many, like one, two,
I
three,
know.
you have like 10 categories here, like communication styles and rules, nonverbals, contextual concepts of like age and sex and class, and implicit realms, and shallow and deep, and approaches to spirituality. And I love learning about that. And I wish more people that identify as Americans would love to learn about other cultures, because it's so interesting what we can learn from, about, even just visiting Canada, like how they view, which they speak English there, just so you know. So it's easy. It's an easy trip. What they see as, leadership and manners and friendship. And I was in Portugal last summer for 14 days. I have some friends that are expats that live out there, and I was there in Lisbon, and I was also on Madeira. Very different, the island, compared to the big city. But I just was talking to a lot of the locals and immigrants that had immigrated there from various places, and just their conceptions of what is a good life was just completely different than my conversations in the United States with people in my age group, who think a good life is about accumulation of wealth and property, and we're all so busy we can't even look at our emails, and we can't even respond to text messages, and we're all sleeping 4 hours. And in Portugal, they were one of my waiters, he spoke English. Well, most of them spoke English, but he was, because I only speak Spanish, which doesn't really, I mean, they speak that in Portugal, but not Portuguese is
not quite the same as the Portuguese.
Right, it's the main language, and I only know a few words in Portuguese, which was sad, but I couldn't learn it as much as I know Spanish. So they were just talking about because what's most important is the way you spend time with loved ones and family and friends, and make sure you go to the beach, a couple times a month. It's important to lay on the beach and read books and stretch. And I was like, my God, like, look, and I'm looking, I'm walking around Portugal, which is famously one of the least crime, the least violent crime in the world. They're in the one of the most peaceful, safe places to live in the world. And I just saw these values, right?
Yes.
And then I come to the US, and we have so much violence and just like everyone's mad at each other. And I saw them getting mad over silly things like architecture, that like how dare they bring in this new building, they should keep it this way, and people were arguing about that. And I was like, I wish this was our argument, in the US. But anyways, I tell you that just because it's so interesting. I mean, any thoughts on what we can learn from others?
Gosh, I could talk about this one forever. Like, for me, the cultural iceberg, first of all, it's not my concept. It came from Edward T. Hall. He's, like, I think probably known as the father of intercultural communication. He's no longer with us. He was actually a friend of my father's, which was kind of amazing. I never did get to meet him, and I wish I could have. And interculturalists, I'm just going to shout out to those that are interculturalists, are ambivalent about an iceberg model in and of itself. So all models are problematic to some degree. So, and that's why I included another model called the cultural tree from a multicultural educator in the book too. So however people want to conceptualize the way that we experience culture, please do, right? So that's not the end all and be all. But what I like about the iceberg, and this particular graphic I did add to, and that's why there's a ton of information there. I was like, just put it all in one place. Is that exactly what you said? It's like a lot of folks feel like they've got a handle on a culture just from what they see on the surface. And that's not even the most of it at all, right? Like, what you're going to see in terms of like the deeper levels of it are what we hold most dear about what our cultures are to us. And in fact, some of them are deeply unconscious. And so when folks touch on those differences, this can be an explanation for folks where they don't understand the reaction, right? So, like, for instance, in different cultures, you're going to have different considerations of what gender is, right? And how it's defined and how you show up in a body of a particular gender. Like, you're not going to know that difference until you're in that culture and expressing your gender expression, and it may bump up against someone else's gender expression from a different culture that feels different. That's going to feel charged, right? So this is an invitation for folks to consider that, right? So this is where a lot of like foreign policies on a large level just tanked in terms of like, going to different countries and trying to impose a Western model of how, women should be doing business in this country kind of thing without understanding the role of women in a particular country. And not to say that they couldn't do business, but how does that look in that country? It's going to look really different than how it looks in the United States. Okay, that's one example. The other example is like, the subtle pieces about, what is meaningful to people. Things like, the concept of death, the concept of love, the concept of intimacy. All those things are deep, deep, deep cultural values that you will not touch on until you've been immersed in it for a little while, if not for a long while, or in relationship with someone from that culture. That's the other offering of all this, is that you can try to learn about cultures by reading it and maybe visiting it, but in reality, the best way that we learn about each other's cultural differences is to be in relationship with each other. Period. Right? Care about somebody. Care about someone from a different culture, and believe me, you're going to learn a lot. A lot, a lot. And when you do, like for me, the best part about, immersing myself in a different culture or in the cultures that I'm in is that I get to take a big exhale around my own worldview. Like when I go back to Brazil, I'm like, oh yeah, I get to slow down. I get to receive touch in a different way because Brazilians are so much more affectionate, right?
Mm.
On a societal level. I can adjust to that. I'm like, this feels really good to me, It feels hard when I come back to the States because people are not greeting each other with 2 kisses on the cheeks and all that kind of stuff, right?
No.
That's not happening. But like what you were saying about Portugal, it's like we forget that our own cultural contexts are not the cultural context.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. There are other ways of living in the world that can offer us a way of feeling into them that now makes it a possibility in our own bodies to experience again, no matter where we are. So, you know, if someone has been a third culture kid and going around the world, and like there's a whole experience there about, what does home mean, and I felt that too. What does home mean? But you also have had experiences in different places with different worldviews and different ways of being that are now part of you, right? And so it expands your possibility of being in relationship, not just with other people, but with your environment and with this planet as a whole. I think that's amazing. That's what we need. Like, diversity is not a bad word. If you think about it in terms of our natural environment, we absolutely need diversity. Plants need diversity. The earth needs diversity in order to survive. We are by nature diverse as humans. And we only grow and do better when we bring together our differences and learn from them and let that teach us to grow and be in different ways that are perhaps something that we've never experienced. So why not be open to that experience?
I agree. And it's even baked into American culture when we used to say variety is the spice
Mm-hmm.
of life, right?
Right.
We want to have different experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
the feeling and the I feel like we need to go back to that, right? Like
Yeah.
caring about somebody, getting involved in other ways teaches us about ourselves and how we relate to that. I'm really dumbing that down. But what you said was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say to people that haven't read the book because we're running out of time, we did not get into oscillation and the sensation, interpretation, action loop. However, these are really cool activities that are easy to do. And I was practicing oscillation last night, and I found it very relaxing.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Especially the wide, narrow, wide one. But this is a preview. So you got to buy the book.
Yes, please buy the book. And there's an embodied code switching whole chapter that brings together all the tools in how to switch between cultural identities in an embodied way. So all the tools make sense when you get to the end. It's a lot of detail back there, but like a lot of folks are like, why am I learning these things? It's like, well, it builds to being able to bring awareness to when you're switching from one cultural identity to another and being in the in-between space of that. It's all in support of you and your many cultural facets and identities. So I really encourage folks to like take time, even if it means jumping into the book at whatever point. It's almost meant to do that. I didn't want it to be linear. So wherever you open the book and start is where you need to be.
Okay, that's excellent. So I'm going to say it again. The link will be in the show notes, but the book is called Movement and Identity, subtitle Multiculturalism, Somatic Awareness, and Embodied Code-Switching by Marcia Bonato. Sorry.
It's okay.
I knew it was one of those. Warren.
Yes.
So, and you can get this online and I'm assuming in certain bookstores. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, all the online bookstores.
All
Yes,
the online
for sure.
bookstores. Okay, excellent. So, yeah, I appreciate it, and I thanks you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Me too. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.